Medical students think when I'm a physician, I'll make enough money that it all works out. And they don't even think about the loans medical students take out multiple six figures in loans. So you've lost all this time where you could have been investing because you've been paying into your education and your degree.
Welcome to Truly Passive Income. I'm Neil Henderson.
And I'm Clint Harris. And today's guest is Dr. Elisa Chiang. She's a board-certified ophthalmologist and PhD neuroscientist. But these days, she's best known for helping physicians build wealth and take control of their financial future. She's a certified life coach, founder of Grow Your Wealthy Mindset, and host of a podcast by the same name, where she teaches doctors how to invest, grow their money, and live life on their own terms. Elisa, great to have you. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. I'm excited about this. We were just talking in the green room. I've got a background in medical sales. So a lot of my peers and friends and people I used to work with are physicians. And I know that physician burnout is an extremely real thing, especially these days. And it seems like it only got worse during COVID and never really got better after that. So continues to compound. So I'm excited about this because I know that this has serious implications for a lot of people that are close to me. So please tell us a little bit about your background. And I'm really curious to know, we speak with a lot of people that have a science background and then people that have a business background. And you're that unique combination where you can kind of blend those two together and help people see the other side. So tell us a little bit about your background, getting started, how you dipped your toe into real estate.
So I took a year off between undergrad and going to medical school, just applying for medical school, spent that year doing research, then decided to do the MD PhD route. So I guess I should rewind a little bit. So I went to Caltech as an undergrad and I graduated in 2001, right after the tech bubble burst. And so the year before me, everyone who was graduating was making, really nice salaries in tech. I had an engineering degree from Caltech, or I have, I guess I should say. And then my year, job market was terrible. I actually interviewed for several consulting firms like McKinsey, didn't get a placement there. So because of the tech bubble, it geared me more toward medicine. I would say I did do pre-med classes. It was something I thought about during undergrad, but that safety and security piece after the stock market, crashed was a real consideration in entering medicine. So I did an MD PhD program, partially because I couldn't stomach taking out loans for the cost of medical school. And during my PhD years, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And, in retrospect, I think the first time I experienced burnout was during those PhD years, and it was really a lack of autonomy. I had a PI, which is kind of your boss when you're a grad student, who was really micromanaging to the point where I kind of felt suffocated. And so I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I started investing in real estate actually at that time with no money, making $20,000 as a grad student.
Yeah, about that. So that's one of the things I know about you is you actually flipped a couple houses while you were in school. Is that right? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I did Rich Dad, Poor Dad Academy. I first did their wholesaling class because that's where they say it's good to start if you have no money. And I didn't really have much money. So I banged on doors. I put up those "We Buy Houses" signs. I got out there and I wasn't getting anywhere. And I started going to RIA meetings. I went to multiple RIA meetings in multiple counties and networking with people. And of course, at these RIA meetings, other people come and sell their courses. And so this guy called Bob Campana, I'm pretty sure he's retired by now, he came and gave a presentation and he had a money back guarantee on his course. And he was like, we talked more afterwards. He's like, look, you're doing all the things, but you're not getting results. I promise you results. And if not, you'll get your money back. Because if you just keep doing what you're doing, but you do what I tell you to do, you're going to make your money back in this course. So I don't remember how much the course was, a few $1,000s. I'd already spent $17,000 on Rich Dad, Poor Dad's Academy on credit card. So there was a fire under my butt to make that money back. And so I did his course and true to his word, he got me through the first rehab. It was profitable. I was able to pay off the credit cards and with the profit, as well as pay off, all the other money I borrowed to make that happen. And so then I'm like, okay, I got to do another one. I got to get some profit out of this, right? And so I did do another one. And I finished the other one when I was back in med school. So what I ended up doing was I graduated off cycle with my PhD. And so I essentially spent 9 months really working this real estate.
Wow.
So, from what I know of MD, PhD programs, they really don't take a whole lot of time, which leaves you a ton of extra time to go off and do wholesaling and house flipping. So, my question is, do you sleep?
I do. I really value sleep. And I'm one of those people who actually needs a lot of sleep. I like to get a minimum of 7 hours, but really I like to get 9 hours.
So,
Wow.
that's my question. How did you manage that? How did you manage doing an MD, PhD program and learning to wholesale and flip houses at the same time?
Well, so I started the learning process during the PhD phase, but then I decided to take those 9 months off. So basically, I finished my PhD off cycle in like November-ish. And by that time, I was really spending most of my time writing my thesis. So it wasn't like I had to run so many experiments, and I probably was a little bit more flexible on my time. So I could attend meetings during the day and work on my PhD at night. Like that wasn't really a problem. Not that that's really a problem, but again, the micromanaging, my boss really liked me be there like all during the workday, because that's when he showed up. But yeah, and then I had those 9 months off. So that's when I really got that first flip doing, because yeah, it was a lot of work. I mean, I looked at so many properties before putting offers in, and I put in so many offers before getting a good offer accepted, something where I can make money.
I'm curious, are any of the things that you learned in those early days of flipping houses and wholesaling lessons that you've taken on to what you do now?
Being not afraid of getting a no, being not afraid of just putting yourself out there and who cares what anyone else thinks. I think those are really valuable lessons for anything.
Yeah, completely. I'm starting to understand, for those listening and not watching on YouTube, I'm starting to understand the plethora of degrees on the wall behind you right now. You've been extremely active and busy. And I want to talk a little bit about that with the trajectory that we see. There's one commonality here. Your story is very unique, but there's some commonalities that we see over and over. The trajectory of people starting in wholesaling, a lot of times people start there because in order to have success in real estate, it takes time, experience, and money, right? If you've got the time or you can make the time, which you somehow did, but you don't have money and you don't have experience, wholesaling is a low-hanging fruit, easy place to start, right? Because you're trading hustle for money, right? So you're trying to go find those deals, flip it to somebody else, make that value delta in between what they're willing to pay and what the seller's willing to sell it for. But that's a very, very active strategy. And with wholesaling or with flipping, let's say you get it right. A lot of people burn out and don't, but the people that get it right, a deal goes right for you and you make some money. And a lot of times that's a light bulb moment. You're like, oh, wow, I see how this can go. But it can be a very difficult thing to scale. And the thing about wholesaling or flipping, it's a wildly active strategy. And the day you stop working is the day you stop getting paid. Because at the end of the day, you're still trading time for money. Now you're moving into a career trajectory where your time is about to become a lot more valuable. As an MD, PhD, you're going to have a high ceiling on what you're making. And it doesn't make sense for you to go wholesale or you to go flip properties 5 or 7 years down the career trajectory because your time's going to be worth so much more, right? So it's one of those times that at that point in your career, it's probably better to keep the main thing the main thing. So I'm curious to know, at what point did you start learning more? You're clearly a lifelong educator, self-educator in real estate and sciences and engineering and everything else. At what point did you start making the shift towards looking into more passive investment strategies? And then how did that blossom into helping other people find that as well?
Yeah, so you're right. Flipping is definitely a lot of work. And it is, once you stop flipping, you don't have any more income. And in retrospect, I do wish I had done the BRRRR strategy, but back then I didn't know about the BRRRR strategy. And if I had kept those houses and they cash flowed and I had that cash flow now, I mean, that would have been phenomenal. But I also needed the money, right? I needed to pay off credit cards. So actually, I turned it into a HELOC. But anyway, it was still credit I desperately wanted paid off. So that decision was that decision. And after flipping the second house, I was back in my third year part of medical school. And then I really didn't have the time to devote to it. So in my mind, I was like, okay, when I'm done with my training and I'm making a lot of money as a physician, then I'm going to find ways to make this real estate work. And there's some part of me that really just thought that physicians invest in real estate. Some of my friends from medical school, their parents had real estate that was an investment. Like I remember one of my friends, they had a, vacation condo in, I can't remember, I think it was Charleston. And she's like, oh, but no, it's really an investment. Like they rent it out. Like, yes, we get to use it sometimes, but it really brings in money. It's not like we just have vacation homes. And I think she was trying to like say that and be like, oh, we're not that rich. But to me, it was just like, yeah, you've got investments that are bringing in more money. That sounds fabulous.
Yeah, that's amazing. I hope it wasn't Charleston. That market's taken off. I used to drive horse carriage tours there 20 something years ago. I think exposure and just having that be a normal in your life, like, oh, this is what successful people do. That's a mentality that I didn't grow up with. So there was a moment in my life that I realized like, oh, I was in college in my first rental property. I went to go drop off the deposit check and just was talking to the guy in his front yard. I was like, got this beautiful house and this nice boat and this nice truck. And I was like, well, what do you do? And he had to stop and think about it. And he's like, well, I kind of just own a bunch of property and collect rent and deal with people and fix them up from time to time. And I was like, that's a thing? Like that can be a career? That's a job? That's amazing. And that kind of was the slippery slope that led me to the Purple Bible and reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad and taking off from there. So at what point did you start looking for your first passive investment or what came next after flipping the properties when you found a way to somehow have some more time, but now you've got a little bit more capital and you're to the point where you'd rather put that money to work instead of taking time off? What did that look like for you?
So I took my first attending job in Virginia. And so I started looking for rental property that I would like long-term rentals where I would have a property manager. And the first thing is just to learn the market because I moved to a new environment for when I took my first job. And as I was running the numbers, so I went to Chesapeake, Suffolk, Norfolk, Virginia, and anyone who knows that area, it's got a very high military presence. So there is actually a lot of people renting who are working for the military and are stationed there for 2 or 3 years. But there are also a lot of military who tend to buy something and then rent it out after they leave after 2 or 3 years. Because I guess it's a place where a lot of them like to come back to as well. And so the rental market seemed ridiculous. Like I ended up renting my own house. I rented a 4-bedroom house with like granite countertops and hardwood floors, like a really nice house that was, I think, valued around $450,000. And I rented it for $1,800 a month. Right. So I was just like, who can, like, you can't make money in this market. And so then when that job didn't really quite work out, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go back home to Cleveland where I know the real estate market and I know people there. I still have connections. I still know contractors. And well, if they're still in business, but good contractors should still be in business, right? and I'm going to restart my real estate investing there. But then when I made that move, it was 2019. And of course, by the time I was really getting kind of back into it, like COVID happened and everything shut down. And so then, I was like, you know what? Let me take some more courses. I need a refresher. And so I did. I took Zero Freedom, which is an online course, specifically physicians who got into real estate investing who created this course because other physicians kept asking them, like, how are you doing this? How are you doing this? And so I took that course. I started buying long-term rentals.
Sorry, what's that course called again?
Zero to Freedom. It's run by Letty and Kenji.
I hadn't heard of it before.
I love that.
I'm trying to dig in here a little bit to figure out exactly what led you to graduate from long-term rentals. How many long-term rentals did you ultimately end up owning?
I ended up having a triplex and a duplex. I bought them and I actually self-managed them just to really learn property management before I handed it off to property manager. So I knew how to manage the property manager. And I held them for a few years. And then actually what happened is they were in the city of Cleveland. The city of Cleveland passed this like lead ordinance for like lead paint that was so expensive to comply with that it would basically eat my cash flow. So I actually was able to, these things take years to roll out. So after running all the numbers, I was like, I could sell for a profit, just take my profit and not deal with this lead paint situation. So yeah, I had 5 doors, but I had them for a few years.
I love that. So was that the catalyst that you were like, time to hang up the active investing strategy and move towards the passive mindset?
So I did start moving to passive even while I held those long-term rentals. I also did a short-term rental and used the short-term loophole to save on taxes as well. But that is also very active. And then when I went on a cruise to Antarctica and I had to find someone to babysit my short-term rental because property managers for short-term rentals charge way too much money.
Because it's hard. I own a short-term rental property management company.
I mean, it's hard, but it's not as hard as like 40, 50% of my gross profits were in the six figures. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, that is a lot. You need more competition in that space, it sounds like. Yeah, Neil and I both have short-term rentals. I've got 14 doors right now, and then I couldn't find a property manager that did a good job. So we had to start a company. We spent a couple years building that out. And it's a very, very active strategy. And over, we see people get to the point of moving on from that to something more passive. As we age or as we get farther down our career trajectory, ultimately, our time becomes the most valuable thing, especially if you start involving kids and travel and things like that. Ultimately, your time becomes worth more than whatever it takes you to actively manage those properties. So that's something that we see over and over. What's the direction that you went? And I want to make a shift here because I know that you're a life coach. I want to talk about grow your wealthy mindset and the money mindset that you talk about. But quickly, we'll try to land the plane on what came next for you. What was the direction that you went as you started looking at more passive strategies?
And so I've invested in syndications, real estate funds. I've looked into debt funds, and there's a debt fund that I'm planning on investing in next time they open. And I started doing that at the same time as the long-term rentals as well.
Good. Yeah, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. That's nice, especially if you can take the money from an active strategy and start investing it into a passive strategy. It makes a good transition there. The hardest thing about passive investment strategies is that sometimes you have to give yourself runway, especially if they're more on the development side, that it can take a little time. So a lot of times, whatever your goal is in terms of passive cash flow, if you try to give yourself 3, 4, 5 years to lead up to that, it's the best thing is to educate yourself and learn as soon as possible and make that transition as early as you can. So talk to me about being a life coach. Obviously, you've somehow found time to go back to school yet again to get certified as a life coach, and you're the founder of Grow Your Wealthy Mindset. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that and the money mindset that's a component of that.
So actually, during the pandemic, there were some of us physicians who really found ourselves with a lot more time. And as an ophthalmologist, I found myself with a lot more time. There were a few months where I only was going to clinic 1 or 2 days a week to see emergencies, and doctors were furloughed. I mean, we had to take vacation time or sick time to make up for the days we weren't working. Luckily, I was the only oculoplastic surgeon for my hospital, so I was on 24/7 calls, so they did have to keep paying me. So I was good, but only because of my unique position. And I hadn't been in that hospital, right? I moved in 2019 and COVID happened in 2020, so I didn't have like a ton of sick time built up to use for my furlough days. So I was really lucky from that standpoint. But that is when I discovered life coaching, because there was just such a crisis. And we had a medical crisis, and we had physicians being furloughed and laid off and not having work and not necessarily knowing when it was going to end, right? And so that is when I found life coaching. I started listening to a life coach school podcast. I ended up deciding that I wanted to do certification. I wasn't necessarily thinking about starting my own life coaching business at the time, but I just wanted those skills and tools to use more to self-coach, to build, to get myself through everything, because I could already see how much changes in me was just coming from getting coached.
You know, I hammer this home often, which is that we all think that, you know, we may have a cushy, stable job that's never going away. I would never think a dentist would have any problem having employment, or an ophthalmologist, and then a pandemic comes along and completely shuts everything down, and suddenly you're without an income for over a year. And so I always encourage people to think about not just building a nest egg, but building extra streams of income that are diversified. Whether it be, as simple as, investing in dividend stocks, or long-term rentals or short-term rentals. Just find little ways to generate extra income that, at a moment's notice you could sort of turn on and live off for, if the worst happens, if you get hit by a car and it can't work, or we have another global pandemic that shuts down, non-emergency doctor's offices for a year.
Yeah. I'll expound on that. There's this sense of security that comes with having a degree-based specialized occupation because, I took off my scrubs and left medical sales in November of 2022. And I left that. And one day I was a medical sales rep. And the next day they called me unemployed. If you're a physician and you quit or lose your job, you know what they call you the next day? Doctor, right? You're still a physician. You have that. You'll always have that. And that's something that doesn't go away. But there's still things that happen in life that are uncertain that we can't plan for, like a global pandemic, which could happen again. We never know, right? And so the way I look at it is you're creating stability and options in your life. We all know, or hopefully we know and believe, that money doesn't buy happiness. But what it can do is create options and stability. And options is really where you want to be in an uncertain world. And the ability to navigate challenges by having more options than people are forced or pigeonholed into a certain position because they have to pay their bills, that's really what you're going for. And nobody can ever take those degrees away from you that you've got behind you. And the next day, you're still a doctor and you can always go back to that. But the reality is you're creating an off-ramp from that lifestyle that a lot of people get locked into with those golden handcuffs. And the day that you wake up and decide you don't want to do that anymore is a really bad day to start focusing on building cash flow, right? You don't wait for it to start raining for Noah to build the ark, right? That's got to happen well ahead of time. So talk to us about the mindset, maybe some of the mistakes that you see a lot of physicians make as they start looking at investing, and what are you offering through your program in terms of education to help people start building that future for themselves with the money mindset?
Yeah. So one of the things I think a lot of medical students think is that, when I'm a physician, I'll make enough money that it all works out. And they don't even think about the loans that they're taking out. And, the average medical students take out multiple six figures in loans. So it's a lot. And it is quite a burden later on because by the time you're done with your medical training, a lot of people are married. Some people have kids. And you're you may be as young as your mid to late 20s, but a lot of people are in their 30s. I was in my 30s by the time I finished my training. And so you've kind of lost all this time where you could have been investing because you've been paying into your education and your degree. And it is definitely worth something. And now you suddenly go from a resident or fellowship salary to an attending salary. And a lot of people don't really know what to do with that money. For some people, they really work on getting those loans paid off as soon as possible, but other people are going for public service loan forgiveness. So they're going to pay the minimum amount and apply for that after 10 years. Though with the current status of things, that might go away for physicians. They're saying that physicians shouldn't actually be qualifying for or don't need it, which is arguable depending on how many loans they are and what specialty they take up and the actual income that they're bringing in. Because unfortunately, there are physicians that don't make multiple six figures.
Yeah. That's a scary place to be. I've got a friend of mine who's a congestive heart failure pharmacist at the hospital, and the hospital went through a situation where they were bought out, and he was 7 years into a 10-year stint of working for a nonprofit so that he could get his medical debt forgiven. And there was a period of time that they were looking like they were going to be bought by a for-profit company, and it's the only hospital in town. And so he was talking about selling his house, moving his family, and having to go someplace else because he's locked into trying to get that loan forgiveness for 10 years. And what you can't control is if somebody pulls the rug out from under the hospital system you're working in, being considered a nonprofit for that, you gotta move the goalpost, right? You're going to have to follow that. If that's what you've just spent 7 years chasing, you can't all of a sudden be like, well, never mind, I'll just pay it all. Right? He's been making minimum payments for a long time. Luckily, in his case, that didn't happen, but that opened my eyes to that situation. Like, that's a scary thing to do, betting on the future, especially in the political headwinds and economic headwinds that we're facing right now and the challenges of the world. 10 years is a long time. That's a scary place to be. And then if you're trying to pay it off as soon as possible, obviously you have the missed opportunity cost of what that looks like and what else you could do with that capital. So I get that as well. In some of your talks, I know you've discussed the concept of defining enough. And I think there's this ambiguity. A lot of physicians go from owing a lot of money and not making any money to all of a sudden making a lot of money and deciding what they need to do with that. And when I'm an attending or when I'm a surgeon or whatever, I'm going to have all this money and I'll be fine. And they're looking forward to that day, I think, in some situations without ever really defining what does enough look like. And you're focused on that financial implication without focusing on the amount of time that you're going to have to sacrifice to get that. So I think that the time component is an important part of the conversation as well. But one of the things that you talk about is helping people discuss the concept of defining enough when it comes to wealth and freedom. So for the listeners or people that are in that career trajectory, especially professional, like ambitious professionals, how do you help them decide what enough looks like for them and establish a goal that they're working towards in their passive investing journey?
Oh, that's good. And that goes into a lot of things. So another mistake I see a lot of physicians make is growing into their newfound income and not really saving enough compared to their income. And so if you're spending most of your income and you're like, let's say you are maxing out your retirement accounts, but that's $23,500 a year for a 401k right now, right? And if you're making $500,000 a year, that's like 5%, that's not even 10%. And really most physicians need to be putting 15 to 20% of their gross income towards that goal of financial independence or financial freedom or retirement or whatever you call it. And so it's really looking at like where your real values are. So there's this idea of like a doctor house or physician house and doctor car, right? I'm going to move up and be driving an Audi or a Mercedes Benz instead of driving my Honda Civic. Well, I still drive a Honda Civic. It's a nice Honda Civic. I mean, I've got the leather seats and, the heated seats and like it's the highest end bells and whistles Honda Civic. But my priority is getting a car that drives me from point A to point B where I'm comfortable. And I test drove the Audis and the Mercedes Benz. And did they drive nicer? Yeah, a little bit. But I'm not that person who loves like driving a nicer car. So it makes no sense for me. I'm not saying that physicians shouldn't buy a nice car. If you're a car person and you love cars and you research cars all the time and you love every time you drive that fancy car, then that might be where you want to put your money. But that might mean that you're not putting as much money into something else that you may or may not desire more. Like I really love travel. I travel a ton. And so that is where I spend really the bulk of my discretionary spending.
Speaking my language.
Yeah, same. Neil and I talk all the time that we'd rather die with a giant stack of pictures of beautiful places we went to with people that we care about, doing things that we love instead of things, right? So that resonates with me. What does it look like for people that want to connect with you or learn more about what you're doing or get in your ecosystem? What does that journey look like from a physician or maybe aspiring physician that's headed in that career path? They want to start talking to you about passive investing. How does that work? Is that through your coaching program or do you have a curriculum or explain that to me so people know what they're looking for?
So I offer essentially two things. The Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, which I host, is a free resource to really help people learn about finances as well as work on their mindset around money. And then there's a paid option for people who really want a lot more support. And so I do one-on-one coaching and I help physicians reach their financial goals, whatever that looks like. And I've had physicians come to me where they had no idea about investing and like their money is literally sitting in a savings account and not even a high yield savings account. I've literally had this happen. And they're just so unsure and afraid of what to do, that's what we work on. And I get to them in a place where they feel confident about managing their money. And usually those people are really just looking for very passive things like stocks and bonds and may consider syndications. Then I've got other people who are like, you know what? I've got tons invested in index funds. I'm all good there, but I want to get into real estate. I really want to diversify more. And so then we talked about all the different ways to invest in real estate because, well, I've done a lot of it, right? I didn't have a successful wholesale career, but I've done the flipping, I've done the long-term rentals, I've done the short-term rentals, and I've done the syndication investing. And so we go into what goes into all of it, the pros and cons of all of them. And I've had people decide to go different ways. And then I start coaching them on how to learn and how to build that repertoire so that they can be confident in investing in whatever they choose.
So you are primarily a passive investor now, is that correct?
That is correct.
And there's so many deals out there, and it's been a rough time for syndications over the last probably 3 years or so in some asset classes. What do you personally look for when evaluating a real estate syndication or fund?
Well, the number one thing is the sponsor, right? You can have an amazing real estate deal and you could have someone who's not so great at running it, essentially make it lose money.
Bet on the jockey, not the horse.
Yeah.
I mean, the horse should be good too, But,
Yeah.
but the first thing I'm looking at is the sponsor. And I vet different sponsors and I really talk to them. And I'll sit and wait. I'll see what deals they have coming through. I'll vet some of their deals, but I may not jump on them. And I'm slow to invest my money in that way. I've spent kind of years looking at people, or I'll just invest in like one deal and do the minimum and see how that goes, see how the communication is, see how I like how it's being run.
I love that. All right. One question that we ask all of our guests is there any one book that really stands out to you that you find yourself recommending more than any others when you're engaging with someone and they ask you the best way that they can educate or get some clarity? Is there one that stands out to you that you feel yourself bringing up more than others?
The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel.
Oh, good one.
Yeah. I haven't read that one.
Yeah, it's in my library. I've got a list of about a dozen to 15 books that I say I'm going to listen to them every year. I typically don't get around to all of them, but yeah, that's one on the list. So I don't think anybody's mentioned that on the podcast yet. So that's a good one.
Yeah, because really mindset, especially when it comes to physicians, right? Like we've got the earning part down. It's the everything else about money.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Elisa Chiang, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your time. If any of our listeners want to hear more about you, your coaching program, or engage and try to educate themselves through your experience, what would be the best way for them to connect and do that?
My website is www.growyourwealthymindset.com. And that's probably the best way. You can contact me directly through there. You can even set up a Zoom meeting through there. You can look at the podcast and there's links to the podcast there. I also have different free resources on there, including 12 financial mistakes that physicians typically make. And so hopefully that will help some physicians avoid some of those mistakes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you being a guest.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening and watching the Truly Passive Income podcast. If you liked the show, if you think it would be useful for someone else, the greatest compliment that you could give us would be to share the episode, leave a comment down below, or leave us an honest review. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to let us know down below. And remember, with truly passive income comes freedom of time, place, and the freedom to pursue your higher purpose.